This talk is entitled The Search for Ultimate Meaning: How Religion's Early Roots Can Move Us from Debate to Conversation. One night, in the middle of my senior year in medical school, the phone rang. It was the call I had been dreading ever since my father was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. You need to come home. Your father is dying. My father was a minister. He had lived inside a world of faith, scripture, duty, and hope. At the time, I was doing advanced studies at the National Cancer Institute of Health in Washington, D.C. When I hung up the phone, I got in my car and drove through the night to my parents' home in Chicago. On that drive, I carried more than the fear of losing my father. I was carrying a question that had been growing in me since childhood. Of all the stories and convictions I had inherited from him, which ones would I carry forward into my own life? And which parts of his faith would remain lasting in me once he was gone? I had grown up in a deeply committed religious world. Faith gave me a story, a community, and a sense that life had meaning. But sitting at my father's bedside, watching someone I loved sleep towards death, I found my attention widening beyond our small room. If my tradition began at a particular moment in history, what about all the people who had faced suffering and death long before it existed? What did they believe? How did they bury their dead? What were their questions about God, meaning, and death? After my father's passing, those questions did not go away. They helped draw me into oncology. I wanted to understand disease, and I wanted to help people facing fear, uncertainty, suffering, and mortality. I trained in cancer medicine and clinical research. I wanted to help patients live longer, suffer less, and face disease with the best tools medicine could offer. And that work mattered. Science mattered. Treatment mattered. Research mattered. But over the years, my patients taught me something I had not fully expected. What they often needed most was not only a physician who understood their disease, but someone who understood them as a human being and was willing to listen to their deep longings. Why did this happen to me? What has my life meant? What happens after death? Will my family remember me? How do I live with regret? Can I be forgiven? These were not abstract theological questions. They were human questions. They arose as time felt finite, and the story of their lives became painfully clear. I also noticed how different faith traditions shaped the way my patients faced those questions. Some found comfort in prayer, scripture, ritual, or the hope of an afterlife. Others wrestled with guilt, fear, or disappointment with God. Some had no formal religious belief, yet still searched for meaning through family, memory, love, service, or reconciliation. My question shifted from what is the right religious doctrine to how do I best enter this person's inner world so I can support them? I began to see the search for ultimate meaning is not confined to churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, or philosophy books. It is also happening in exam rooms, hospital rooms, infusion centers, family meetings, and in the silence after difficult news. Cancer exposed the whole human being, not only biology, but fear, meaning, memory, love, and hope. I carried these lessons with him. But another door had already begun to open. Years earlier, I had watched David Attenborough's Life on Earth, and for the first time, I saw the story of life as a long unfolding process. Life had changed, adapted, diversified, and survived across immense stretches of time. I began to study how our planet formed, how life emerged, and how human beings appear. I could not set aside my religious upbringing. It had shaped me too deeply. So the question was no longer, will science replace religion? But how do these two stories of human existence belong together? That search led me to the history of religion itself. Early burials, tribal spiritualities, the religions of kings and empires, and the great and philosophical awakening often called the Axial Age. Religion no longer looked like a set of doctors dropped fully formed from the sky. It looked like the human response to mortality, suffering. Archaeology cannot tell us exactly what early humans believed, but it can show us that long before writing, human beings were treating death, bodies, objects, and places as more than practical matters. They were not simply disposing of the dead, they were responding to death. They were making meaning. As human societies changed, religion changed with them. Villages became cities, cities became kingdoms, kingdoms became empires. Religion grew larger and more organized. It gave people identity and belonging. It also became entangled with hierarchy, authorities, and violence. Religion could not comfort the grieving and bind communities together, and it could also divide insiders from outsiders and make cruelty feel holy. Then unexpected reunion brought all that thinking to a very personal test. After 50 years without contact, I reconnected with one of my religious teachers from high school and college. He had helped shape the religious world of my youth, and I entered the conversation with respect and curiosity. For about 2 months, we exchanged emails. He kept returning kindly and sincerely to the doctrinal truths that were central to his life. I kept trying to explain how science, medicine, history, and human evolution had changed the way I understood religion. Neither one of us was hostile, but slowly I sensed that we were not really meeting each other. Then, in a very kind way, he said something that made me stop. These were not his exact words, but the message was, I am not sure it is worth continuing this conversation. When I read those words, I stared into the screen. It felt like a door closing. Here was someone I respected, someone who had helped shape my early faith, and yet the conversation itself seemed to have reached its limits. That was when I saw the problem more clearly. We were having a debate disguised as a conversation. And that is what happens to so many conversations about religion today. We live in a world of religious cacophony. Everywhere we turn, there are competing voices, doctrines, denominations, ideologies, spiritual movements, secular critiques, podcasts, social media arguments, and public debates. Some promise certainty, some denounce religion altogether, some defend inherited beliefs, others attack them. The result is often not understanding, but noise. Believers feel that science and history are attacking the foundations of faith. Skeptics often see religion as outdated, irrational, or dangerous. So the conversation becomes a debate. One side defends, the other one attacks, and very little real understanding occurs. But what if both sides are starting too late in the story? What if religion is not first a set of propositions to be proven or disproven? What if religion is humanity's ancient search for ultimate meaning, a way of facing suffering, death, love, guilt, mortality, belonging, and hope? And what if religion, because it arose within human life, has always changed as human beings change? What if it has grown, adapted, expanded, regressed, and reformed as societies became more complex and as our moral imagination widened? That does not settle the question of God. It does not tell anyone what they must believe. It does not ask skeptics to become religious. It does not ask believers to abandon faith. But it changes the conversation. It allows believers to say, my faith has a history, and that does not destroy it. It allows skeptics to say religion is human, and that does not make it worthless. It allows all of us to ask better questions. What human needs does religion address? Where has it deepened compassion? Where has it justified harm? What should we preserve and what should we outgrow? This is the main point I want you to hear. Religion is humanity's ancient search for ultimate meaning. And when we see it that way, believers and skeptics can move beyond debate and begin a more honest conversation about what we are all trying to carry, understand, and hope for. The search is older than any one tradition, older than our arguments, older than our denominations, older than the modern divide between believer and skeptic. Long before we inherited our labels, human beings were already trying to make sense of suffering, death, love, guilt, belonging, and hope. In the diverse world in which we live, learning to understand each other is not optional. It is essential. We cannot reduce people to their doctrines, doubts, or rituals, politics, or labels. Behind every belief and behind every rejection of belief, there's a human being shaped by memory, family, culture, grief, hope, fear, love, and longing. That human being deserves more than a caricature. That human being deserves a dialogue. So here's my invitation. With the next 24 hours, find one person who sees religion or spirituality different from you. Ask one honest question, not to correct it, not to debate them. Ask them, what has your tradition or your rejection of tradition helped you make sense of? And how has it helped you live a more fulfilling life? Then listen. You do not have to agree. You do not have to surrender your convictions. But you do have to let this person be more than a position you argue against. After you have done that once, let it change how you enter the next conversation about belief or doubt. Resist the urge to win. Begin with curiosity. Remember that behind every belief and behind every rejection of belief is another human being trying in their own way to carry the weight of being alive. When I was young, I wondered about all the people who lived before my tradition began. What did they believe? How did they face suffering? Where were their questions? What were their questions about meaning and death? Now I think I understand them a little bit better. They were not different from us. They were reaching beyond survival. They were creating rituals, stories, obligations, and hopes. They were searching, and we are still searching. Religion, at its best, is not the end of that search. It is one of humanity's oldest ways of keeping the search alive.